Coach Wade, thank you so much for your time. Really looking forward to talking with you and kind of hearing about the things you've been getting into. So for the listeners at home, will you tell us a little bit about your background, your motivation, and where you are currently?
Yeah, first, thanks for having me on. I've been looking forward to this, so definitely thank you for the invitation. My background, man, I grew up playing all kinds of sports and was probably most talented in soccer. And so I'm from a small town in West Texas and started coaching for our club when I was probably a junior or senior in high school, and then started running some private lessons for like some of our younger goalkeepers. I remember the first time that I knew that I wanted to coach, and I was working a clinic for our club team. And I'm standing across the field from a teammate of mine, Jessica Salgado, and running up and down the field, coaching these kids, and I just knew, like, this is what I have to do for the rest of my life.
Okay.
So I was pretty fortunate. After high school, I played soccer at the University of Oklahoma and coached a JV team there and always worked the camps. And then I went to Syracuse as a grad assistant for women's soccer.
Okay.
And I wanted to be like in the weight room side. I loved that part when I was at Oklahoma, but I was so naive. I didn't really know how to get into it and kind of like build those relationships for the connections. And so, but I knew that I wanted to coach. So I went to Syracuse and I thought, I don't see the game of soccer from a chess, like the chess game of like the substitution rules and recruiting and like that just is over my head. But to watch a game, and at that time particularly soccer, but now almost any game, I watch it for like levels of fatigue, and I watch change of directions, and I watch mechanics, and I watch for, how and why are they getting knocked off the ball. So when I went to Syracuse, they had a master's program in exercise science, and I was like, this is perfect. I'm gonna be a successful coach because my teams are always going to be outlast. They'll be able to outlast everybody. It's certainly not going to be because I'm going to be able to out-coach the game from other people. And I realized within about, 2 weeks that being a soccer sport coach was just not where I was going to be successful. And was able to work my way in the weight room there. And so I actually spent 3 years at Syracuse and did a number of kind of independent studies to finish up my degree. And I was fortunate that my advisor wasn't going to let me graduate. I had two options if I was going to graduate. One was go to the Olympic Training Center, because that's super easy to get an internship there. Or one was for Syracuse to give me a team to oversee. And so fortunately, Syracuse gave me, quote unquote, women's soccer and totally threw me to the wolves, but never let me do anything stupid, never let me hurt a student athlete. And then I traveled with women's basketball, which was awesome because they went to the NCAA tournament that year.
Wow, okay. It's a great experience.
Yeah, so it was super cool. I had a really good experience. From Syracuse, I went to the University of Houston and sat on Chad Dennis's couch for a year.
Okay.
Chad Dennis, he is such a brilliant programming mind. And, he's pretty quiet. But God, is he smart? And I sat on his couch for a year, and he helped me get the job at Columbia.
Okay. And he's such a nice guy also.
Oh my God, super nice. Like always willing to talk shop. And just so interesting and so intelligent.
Exactly, I agree.
Good dude. So, he really helped me get to Columbia in New York City. Because he knew that staff. And at Columbia, I had 11 teams that I oversaw myself.
Wow.
Which equaled out to be a little bit more than 225 student athletes.
Okay.
And I assisted with football.
Wow.
So it was wild. In one day, I might go from assisting football to women's archery. And it really gave you the opportunity, I think, to sort of stretch my authentic coaching voice and really kind of find those limits. And find, who I am coaching a very large group of men's teams. That's much more intense, and then a smaller women's team. And I wouldn't exactly describe like women's archery on the same intensity level as football, right?
Hopefully you wouldn't.
But different. And so that was super cool. And after Columbia, I went to the University of Portland. I was there for 6 years, and was working with Brad Scott and had a variety of teams and taught some classes and Brad and I were able to grow that department from just the two of us to, I think at one point we had, 6 or 7 interns, and now there's 3 full-time guys on staff. And I ended there as the director of sports performance before my wife and I had to move to Baltimore.
Mm-hmm.
And she was offered a job at a career opportunity out here at Johns Hopkins that we couldn't pass up.
Yeah.
So, I had to leave my position at Portland. And Portland is such a cool, it's such a cool city. It was such a cool university.
Oh, tell me about it. Yeah. Really has everything to offer.
Yeah. Such a beautiful city. And the campus itself, the campus community is so supportive, and how many people we worked across campus, from the professors and students in the business school to people in the nursing department who were just dialed in on trying to help other people across campus. Was really, really a cool experience. So I was sad to leave. I was sad to leave the student athletes. And then I moved across the country to Baltimore, where I am currently, and
you've been back and forth from East to West Coast. That's just the story of your life right now.
I know. I've moved across the country 6 times.
Wow. I drove across once, and I was like, well, hopefully I settle down here soon. It's crazy.
Yeah. I would like to be done with the big cross country moves, but I feel so fortunate of being able to experience so many different parts of our country, from small town in West Texas to Oklahoma to upstate New York. And I went, going from Syracuse to Houston, I went from the snowiest city in America to the hottest.
Yeah. Okay.
And,
so
I've been able to experience some extremes, which I think is really cool.
Most definitely, and the culture changes must be big as well.
Yeah, it's fair to say that the culture between Portland, Oregon, and Baltimore is pretty different.
Yeah. So what kind of led you to create Blue Chip Performance?
Yeah, well, when my wife accepted the job at Johns Hopkins and we moved from Portland, Oregon to Baltimore, I was home with our oldest son for 8 or 9 months until he could start daycare.
Okay.
And so I had some time to sort of do some soul searching, and I don't think this is true of everyone's experience, but it was true of my experience, that my daily hours on the college sector there's a ton of early mornings, there's a ton of late evenings, and a lot of weekends. And that was also my expectations of how I wanted to do my job.
Yeah.
But once I was home for that amount of time with my son, and subsequently we have a second, I wanted those mornings and evenings and weekends to be dedicated to spending time with them. But I love the subject matter.
Yeah.
I love sports performance. I love all things physiology. I love all things monitoring. And so in that kind of 8 or 9 month period, I did some soul searching and thought about, what am I good at? Where's my experience? And where is there a gap that I can help fill? And I'm very good at, I understand energy system development. I understand bioenergetics. I understand monitoring. I understand the college environment. And that's a gap that I wanted to fill, and I felt like that was a space that had some need. And so I created Blue Chip with the intent to bring applied sports science to a variety of club and collegiate teams and sports, regardless of where you live. Just like you and I are having this podcast.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of information and a lot of benefits that I can do in this area and still do really good work that I'm passionate about, that I'm good at, but also make sure that I spend the time with my family that is important to me to spend.
Yeah, no, most definitely. So you kind of touched on it a little bit, but what are some of the services that you offer?
Yeah, so the main thing that we're focused on is team services with club and collegiate teams of helping to bring applied sports science. And by that, what I mean is, maybe it's something as simple as helping to figure out what is your testing data actually telling you. There's a staggering amount, I think, and this is not a knock on anybody, but it's a staggering amount of how much testing data we have that's truly pass-fail, as opposed to giving us an idea of where our student athletes are and helping us meet them where they are and pave a road to get them to success.
Okay.
So helping to decipher that all the way up to basically becoming an extension of your staff and offering year-round programming and athlete monitoring. So that programming could look as if I was going to write, any athletic performance programming that you would want, or it could come from, let's sit down and look at practices and plan, what are our durations and intensities, and what is the cost of doing business for your team?
Yeah. So
it's really spanning a gamut of how much support do you need and how can I be a best fit?
Yeah. No, I like that. So very versatile, and a lot of things that a lot of people are missing, a lot of departments are missing, especially like you were saying, right, in smaller departments, like you and Brad, a smaller department. If you could step outside yourself and offer the same service back to those two people, right? It'd be crazy.
Yeah, totally. And I think one of the areas that I'm super excited about is, how many student athletes of all of your freshmen that come in, do you truly know what their level is when they're coming in? Usually you're getting a student athlete in and you're completely blind to what they've done over the summer. Right?
Yeah. And especially,
so that's an area that I think is really valuable and really underserved.
Yeah.
Because, I'm in a position now where regardless of where your student athletes are coming from, whether they're, Florida, California, Washington, Nevada, if you've got, 5 or 10 incoming players, there's no reason that I can't train them as a team, just as you and I are having this conversation right now, right? And overseeing their development before they get on campus, and making sure that what they're doing is geared towards what your program looks for. So what are the conditioning tests that you're looking for? What is the particular sport? What are the demands of your not just your sport, but your program within your conference, right? And how do we sort of gear them to be a little bit more prepared? I think, the number of injuries for incoming student athletes for their freshman year is staggering. It's like, I want to say it's like 30%, and I could be wrong, and I'll check that for you, but that number is we've got to be able to do something about the injury rate from your incoming freshmen.
Yeah.
And I think that's an area that I can be really helpful.
Oh, no, I agree, and especially in sports like, for example, soccer, where there's not a true preseason. They're just kind of coming in. You have a couple weeks, and then you're playing games.
Totally.
So that's one of the biggest things that I found is how do you combat that, right? If you don't have any hands-on, you don't even know this kid. Like, how can you help them? So
yeah, and you might have some communication with some of their club coaches, but it's nowhere near of what you would like to have.
Exactly.
And I think we all struggle enough just to get the student athletes that are already signed and already on the roster to know sort of what they're doing over the summer.
Yeah.
But you have a little bit of a better guesstimate of likely what you're going to get. And my freshman year, I was injured pretty quickly. I had surgery my freshman year. I was out. I broke my thumb. Both of them were sort of contact injuries, but I was not prepared for the workloads that were coming at me my freshman year.
Oh gosh, yeah.
And I think a high number, certainly not all, but a high number of the freshmen coming in are not prepared for the workloads that they're about to experience.
Agreed. So let's touch a little bit on the model that you have set up at Blue Chip, right? You kind of talked about the services, right? But how does that model look for different coaches, for people that may understand more data monitoring, for people that don't really know what they're doing with data monitoring, that kind of stuff? How does that look?
So I think the first thing is we've got to figure out, what's the puzzle that they're trying to solve before we know what and if at all data monitoring we're going to do.
Yeah.
And so I use Coach Me Plus, whether we're going to do, a subjective questionnaire, RPE or wellness, or you want to hold GPS or any type of wearable technology. Yeah. So all of that is at least housed in Coach Me Plus, so that it can be consistent over years, right? And then, it's a communication, just as if you would walk down to a coach's office and have a conversation with them on a, every other day or weekly or every other week kind of basis, and going over what's the data that we're seeing. And I think, Blue Chip, although in some ways I rely quite heavily on technology because of meeting with people around the country and around the states, that we're actually, the goal is to be able to offload some of your plate because I'm not in front of your student athletes, right? And as a sport coach who's on campus, you have the potential to be a world-class sport coach, floor coach, and build a relationship with those student athletes, right? And if you are sitting behind a computer trying to figure out all of this data monitoring, then it takes you away from that student athlete.
Agreed, yeah.
When, so much of the decisions that we make with monitoring, there's a big portion that comes from the personnel and knowing who your players are and knowing, how they interact with different stressors, and then being able to have a conversation with them when we have a piece of monitoring coming up.
Yeah.
In some ways, it's trying to be an extension of your staff so that you can go be have more time face-to-face with those student athletes.
Yeah, yeah.
And when they come into your office, that you can literally push your chair away from your desk
Mm-hmm.
and truly give them some focus.
Yeah.
And be good at what you're good at. I think there's so many sport coaches that are trying to run their own monitoring,
Mm-hmm.
and like that's a job within itself.
Yeah.
You know, and if you're a sport coach, you're looking at recruiting and budgets and planning practice, and you already have one job.
Yeah, exactly.
You need to add another one to you, right?
Yeah.
Let me, I'm good at the monitoring and I'm
Mm-hmm.
good at the energy system development. You go be really good with the kids that you recruited,
Mm.
and let me offload some work from you.
Yeah, no, I like that. And that's, I mean, a lot of people got into it for the interaction piece, right? Not necessarily that data computer piece. And then when they get into it, they're overwhelmed. So I think that's such a valuable service.
Yeah, I mean, I love the coaching piece. I love the relationships with my student athletes, and
Mm-hmm.
I know that that's a piece. Like, I miss that piece quite a bit.
Yeah.
But, I just need to be here for my kids. So I'm
exactly.
we can figure it out. And if you're on campus, go be world class with the student athletes that are sitting in front of you.
No, I like that. Okay. So there's a lot of technology out there, right? So what are your kind of recommendations on recent technology? What should we invest in as coaches, and what should we look for when deciding which companies to go with?
So I think it always comes back to what's your question
Mm-hmm.
and what's your personnel.
Mm.
If you don't have the right personnel, it doesn't matter what technology you want to purchase.
Yeah.
You're not going to be able to get out what you want to get out of it, right?
Okay.
If it's a sport coaching staff who doesn't have a ton of extra time or extra resources
Mm-hmm.
or the knowledge in energy system development,
Mm-hmm.
they may not want to run a heart rate or a GPS or one of the combined systems of all that data,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Yeah.
So I think, who's your personnel that you have to
Mm-hmm.
look through that stuff? What is your question?
Mm-hmm.
And what is your budget? If it's a question, and this is kind of our first time going through data monitoring, then I think you can get a ton of answers out of something as simple as session RPE or something as simple as your wellness
Mm-hmm.
monitoring. You can get a lot of information out of that.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
again, I think you're better off putting your money into the right personnel.
Yeah, I like that. Okay. So once we kind of figure out what type of technology we want, right, how can we sort through some of this junk when analyzing data?
Yeah, the junk pieces, I think it still comes back to like knowing exactly kind of what your question is
Mm-hmm.
before you begin, because you don't want to just start monitoring for the sake of monitoring,
Yeah.
right?
Which is what a lot of people do.
Yeah, and I understand that. Like when we first started monitoring, we did in some ways because we're like, what are we looking for?
Yeah.
Like, what are we trying to figure out?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think, in some ways we were able to do that because it wasn't invasive. No coach was asking us to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And we were trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
And we started with like straight up pen and paper and had a few student athletes. Most of them we had them do it just when they came in the weight room. And then we had a couple who did it day in and day out religiously.
Mm-hmm.
And so you get all this paper back and you're like, what do I do?
Yeah.
Sit here and like type all this into Excel.
Yeah.
And, figure it out. And so, that's when we went to Google Drive and some of the Google Sheets.
Mm-hmm.
And we definitely still had like some of the quote junk data, but I think we were fortunate because we organized it really well when we first went in.
Mm-hmm.
And that again was benefit of going across campus and asking somebody who's better with statistics and organizing data than we were to help guide us down that path.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were able to eliminate some of that. And then we also had the polar systems. And so let's say one of the things you're going to look at sometimes with polar is like your overall training load, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you might look at, let's say, heart rate spent above 90%.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Well, if your overall training load gets really high,
Yeah.
then do you know where that arbitrary number is coming from?
Yeah.
Have the numbers increased maybe because we had a longer duration and the total load is actually coming from a lower heart rate, similar to GPS. Like if you covered a lot more ground, where is that ground coming from? Is it coming from your high velocity? Is it coming from kind of your lower level work?
Mm-hmm.
So, I think sorting through the junk data is definitely like, what's your question going into it? And then who's the person who can sort of sift through that, who knows enough about physiology to say these things matter, or this isn't really that big of a load.
Okay. So
then you can be retroactive, right?
Yeah.
You can go back and think about like, oh, we've got, 3 million data points. What if I look at this?
Yeah.
As long as it's organized well.
No, I like that. Okay. And you touched on it a little bit, right? But what are the cost-effective measures we can kind of take for those on a smaller budget?
Yeah, so I think there's a ton of cost-effective monitoring that you can do. Certainly, pen and paper is how we all first started. Well, not all of us, but that's how we first started.
Yeah.
And then, I know a ton of people use Google Drive and Google Sheets, which is super easy to create a form that's, the language is appropriate for your population. That goes into your Google Sheets, which is pretty easy to utilize. I think some simple like performance monitoring of, like one of the things we took at University of Portland was resting heart rate. And, what we wanted to really see was trends. And so we had the teams download, I don't know, one of the basic heart rate apps that was like either free or like 99 cents where you put your finger on the camera.
Yeah.
But what we wanted to see was overall trends and to call some awareness to it.
Yeah.
At the time, we also used Sleep Cycle, which I think was like 99 cents at the time. I don't know what it is anymore. But that's pretty cheap because certainly our sleep greatly impacts our ability to recover. I think you can there's a CNS tap test that you can do on your phone. You could do like a hand dynamometer, which I always mispronounce. If you don't have a jump pad, those are fairly inexpensive, but if you have really no money, just do a broad jump, right? And then I think you can do a lot of like your supplemental or your submaximal fitness testing.
Okay.
So if you do, if you have your fitness testing well organized, and let's say you do a yo-yo in the beginning, and once a week you want to double check your sort of cardiac response and recovery, you can do a submaximal yo-yo test. It's going to take you like 6 minutes to run it.
Yeah.
It's not going to crush them.
Yeah.
You can even do like an RPE right after that if you don't have heart rate, or if you have some simple watches and a chest strap, then you can look at what's their heart rate right when they finish and 60 seconds after, and now you're able to track heart rate recovery. So I think you can do some really good monitoring for pretty inexpensively. Yeah.
No, I like that. And a lot of people just don't think about it. They think, oh man, we have to have the cutting edge, the most expensive thing. But again,
right, and the most expensive thing may not be the right thing.
Exactly.
And like what's your culture and what is your budget and why are you using this monitoring?
Yeah. No, I like that. Okay. Kind of touched on it earlier, right? But how do we manage stress and maladaptation, and how can we communicate that effectively to sport coaches?
Yeah, so at the University of Portland, I'll tell you the story. At UP, we were looking at a wellness questionnaire with several teams.
Okay.
And what was important to us was we needed to identify the question that the coach was trying to solve, and how are we going to solve that question. And our coaching staff wanted to know what could they do with their team that day? How hard could they push them?
Yeah.
Where did they have to back off, and who did they have to back off on? Right. So the way that we were going to go about solving that puzzle and those questions was we wanted to do a wellness questionnaire. And so in order to do that, we needed to know what was the question the coach wanted to solve, and how were we going to bring succinct visual information to give insight to that puzzle that was actionable.
Yeah.
I wanted to take the coach information and say, here are the groups that we've discussed. Here's what my suggestions are of the changes that we make either to practice or to my area of, any of the strength and conditioning that we're going to do with those teams. With the student athletes, we knew that the wellness questionnaire, that sleep and how they treated themselves outside of training or the playing surface, that was going to impact what we could do there.
Yeah,
right?
most definitely.
So we tracked things that were important to us was like nutrition, sleep, those types of things that they were going to change.
Okay.
And we also looked at, mood, soreness, fatigue, things that matter to them. And then we tracked what were some physical testing information that was important to them. So we had a student athlete who, she was supposed to be our best rebounder, right? So vertical jump was important to her. And we took a vertical jump every single time the team came in.
Yeah.
So we were able to run some basic correlations of sleep and vertical jump. So, we showed her, hey, when you sleep 5 hours a night, this is impacting your vertical jump.
Yeah.
vertical jump is probably going to impact your ability to be the best rebounder on the team.
Yeah.
We had student athletes who were more concerned about their overall conditioning. And so we also took resting heart rate. We tracked what was the submaximal yo-yo score. And so what we tried to do was what is important to that student athlete and what is important to the coach.
Yeah.
And by tracking this wellness, one student athlete we had was not a little, kind of a little bit of like a gray stormy cloud sometimes. Like she just wasn't always rainbows and unicorns.
Okay.
But we had a ton of data on her.
Yeah.
And so when her numbers dipped,
Uh-huh.
we were able to go to the coaches and be like, something's up.
Mm-hmm.
But we had pulled out the difference between stress and academic stress. Because,
I think that's important, yeah.
yeah, I mean, at University of Portland and a variety of universities out there, academic stress can be really, really high.
Yeah.
Right? So we realized that her academic stress was what was really impacting her wellness scores and what her readiness was to play, right?
Yeah.
So we went to the coaching staff, took actionable data that showed her, sort of her acute stress and her overall trends to date.
Okay.
To show something's up with the student athlete.
Yeah.
And at first they're like, no, that's just her. I said, it's not. Like, look, this is her data. And
yeah, there's a difference.
Yeah, there's a difference. There's a difference with her that is true to her. And so that coaching staff, they had taken the time to build relationships with their student athletes, right? I think that's super important, and that's one of the things that Blue Chip hopes to bring is if I can get you out from behind a computer doing things that are maybe outside of what your daily job is, and you can dial more into your student athletes, and it allows you to have some of these conversations. So we had this conversation with the student athlete about, what's up with the academic stress and what are some ways that we can help. And it turns out that before we ever got grades out, she was super stressed about a class. And so, we were able to offload like a little bit of time from practice and a little bit of time from the weight room. And we were able to get her some academic help. Which, once we relieved that stress, we mitigated that problem, and then all of her numbers on the court shot back up.
Wow.
So that was huge. It was huge for that student athlete. I think that was huge for the sport coaches. It helps us build relationships across campus.
Yeah. It's almost counterintuitive as well, because you think, oh, we need to put more on, we need to do more modalities, but really you just have to take some things off.
Yeah, sometimes it's totally about pulling back and about knowing where to pull back for each individual, because I think we always look at finals and dead week, and there are some very blatant times of the year that are going to be stressful.
Yeah.
But there are some hidden times of the year in certain classes that as a coaching staff we don't know anything about because we're not sitting in that class.
Exactly.
And that's where that popped up, and that was huge for us.
Yeah.
We had another student athlete on a different team who she loved her sport. She didn't want to go play professionally, and she wasn't going to play a ton for her team. And so there wasn't a ton of sport metrics that we could pull out that would really resonate with her. But she really wanted to go into elementary education. Yeah. And so we talked a lot about, her nutrition and her sleep, of how to set yourself up to be the best teacher you can. If you're going to be teaching, 5-year-olds or 5th graders or 8th graders or whatever, even college students, if you show up hungry and with poor sleep, you're not going to be at your best.
Oh,
right?
Not at all, yeah.
And so I think, whether you're communicating to your sport coaches or you're communicating to your student athletes, it's understanding what is important to them.
Yeah.
And how do you use what's important to them to communicate your message.
Yeah.
And to really educate them about, taking care of themselves and their hydration and their nutrition and their sleep and all of those things outside of what we can control impacts their readiness for what we are asking of them, right?
Agreed,
so,
yeah,
with all of our student athletes, it was figuring out what is important to you and giving them a printout once a week of their loads to date and then their chronic loads and correlations and some basic statistics that were important to them to try and make the changes that we needed them to make so that we could go back to the coaches and say, here's what we need from you and here's what your student athletes are doing. Like, we're all in the trenches together, right? And so that for us was how we found success.
No, that's good. Okay. So with all that, right, how do we kind of increase compliance on some of these things that we can't necessarily enforce, or we can't necessarily get directly the responses that we want when we want them? Like, how do we increase compliance on like questionnaires and things like that?
Like from your student athletes?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think that piece is always going to be tricky.
Mm-hmm.
It certainly is beneficial if you have a sport coach who is behind it and supportive of it.
Okay.
If you have a sport coach who's also going to help make some changes on their end based off of it.
Yeah.
That is certainly beneficial and certainly helpful. If you don't, then I think your best bet is to try and really get to know your student athletes and educate them of here's what we're doing. And, for some student athletes, they may not care to try and go play professionally.
Yeah.
It may not be that. If let's say they're an education major, then let's talk about how you treat yourself impacts who you're going to be professionally.
Yeah.
Like our result is that we win more games, and our result is that you show up better prepared to be an athlete. But our conversation might have been geared towards making you a better professional after college, and that's what helped you make the changes that we were asking for to get the result that we wanted.
I like that. Okay. So how can we kind of use technology to figure out athlete readiness? And you touched on it a little bit, predictive models, and how can we use it in return to play protocols?
Yeah, I think the predictive models is, I think they get kind of tricky because there's so many pieces that we need, right? To kind of determine who can we push and who do we have to pull back on. You need to understand like their overall fitness levels, because that certainly is going to impact their ability to recover. You need to understand their overall strength levels. We need to understand like their outside stresses and all of those pieces before we can sort of make a determination of who we're going to push and who we're going to pull back.
Okay.
I think you can probably run some pretty interesting correlations to say, when we see these trends, I know that so-and-so is they're pretty ready to go, right? Like you can do that pretty easily with HRV.
Yeah.
You know that they're like, they're ready to go today. They're fired up. If you're looking at like wellness and RPE, I think that's a little bit trickier to try and say, like Juan's ready to go today. This guy, he's on fire.
Yeah.
So I think the predictive piece is tricky with the data analytics of. I also think it's super tricky to try and say I can predict when you're going to pull a hamstring. And
that's kind of dangerous.
I think if there was that magic number out there and that analysis, then it'd be worth a lot of money.
Yeah.
Everybody's environment is so different.
That's true. No, that's a good point. Okay, so what about in like return to play protocols?
The return to play protocols, I think the monitoring is huge because we can look at if you are a returner and we've got some data on you, we can say, okay, here were the thresholds or here were the numbers that you were hitting pre-injury. If you're an incoming freshman and we have some type of fitness testing on you that is something more than pass-fail, then I think that we can compare you to people who are similar position or similar fitness and strength levels to say these are the thresholds that we need to be able to get to, right? And it's a little bit more of a blueprint. But I certainly think it helps to give you a roadmap of at least the load that they need to be able to handle and the load that we're trying to get to. Then I think the benefit of using this monitoring is that you now understand how this person is responding to the loads that you're giving them as they work back on this path. Because again, the overall stress of being injured can really mentally impact your student athletes.
Oh goodness, yeah.
So I think that piece is monumental.
Yeah. Okay. So moving forward a little bit, how can we use technology to kind of influence positive habits in nutrition? Or is there a way we can do that?
Well, I think the nutrition piece is so cultural, right? And trying to meet people where they are. I'm a big believer that with nutrition, that people come together over the dinner table. And I've been fortunate to coach athletes from all over the world. And one of the things that I've used in the past that I really liked was Meal Logger.
Okay.
And it's basically it's almost like Facebook for nutrition.
Oh, wow, okay.
And we created groups within the specific teams. And so you take a picture of your meal and people can comment on it. And so when I was overseeing the nutrition aspect, then I can comment on it and say, hey, great job. Or look at, one of the easiest things is look at all of the color on your meal. If everything is like this brown French fry, hamburger bun color, and somebody else is like full of like greens and reds and oranges, then maybe the conversation is truly just about trying to get more color on your plate to get them to eat a little bit healthier, and to come together over that dinner table of when they're gone in training over the summer, or trying new recipes from different places. I think if you've got some people who are pretty dialed in on their nutrition, and now you're going to start to say, okay, is it hydration levels that are impacting HRV or some of your other cardiac responses? Is it a dietary sensitivity? Then there's a different way that maybe you can go about looking at it. So I think it depends on where you're starting from and kind of what you're trying to do. Yeah.
No, definitely. Okay. And then you talked about a little bit earlier on the sleep monitoring apps. Okay, but what's your take on those as a whole? Like, does the cost outweigh the benefit as far as like being connected to technology that much, or what are your thoughts on that?
I think even if the cost outweigh the benefits of being connected to technology that much, like that's the direction that we're going. I don't think that monitoring sleep or monitoring your heart rate when you go for a run, or GPS when you're playing, and sort of teasing out some of these pieces. I think the benefit is an education piece, and sleep impacts us so much, right? Like how many college students, pull all-nighters trying to study for an exam, and an all-nighter is going to decrease your learning efficiency by at least 40%. So if we look at the data that says, okay, your learning percentage because of lack of sleep can decrease 40%, and your injury susceptibility is going to increase by at least 1.7%, that's huge. So whether they are trying to study for an exam, or prepare for their first interview, or learn a new offense, that one little thing can have a huge impact on all of those. So I think, in that sense, when you look at weighing the pros and the cons, I think monitoring your sleep can be so beneficial. And something like Sleep Cycle that we've used, it kind of brings awareness to like what time you went to bed, what's your consistency, what's your routine. You can put in like a questionnaire in there for yourself of, was today a good day? Was it a bad day? Did you have caffeine? Did you drink alcohol? And you can customize it. So like, did you read a book tonight? Did you watch TV? All of those things, and start to see what are the habits that you're creating that improve your sleep, and what are the habits that you create that diminish your sleep quality and sleep duration. So I think that piece is really interesting. I think if you need to get pretty detailed about some stuff, fatigue science and like their wearable wristband, I would love to try out I believe you say it Aura ring?
I don't know how to pronounce it, but I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, where I think it'll track your sleep, it gives you HRV, it gives you some interesting things. So there's certainly, obviously, like all of this monitoring, there's a big spectrum. But, our student athletes and most of us are going to have our phone right beside our bed anyway.
That's a good point.
Like, put something on there and kind of educate yourself about your sleep, and maybe you do finally get to a point where you say, I'm going to leave this in the kitchen. But otherwise, I think monitoring your sleep from an educational standpoint is hugely beneficial.
That's a good point, right? So if we constantly are connected anyway, we might as well do something beneficial. I like that. Okay.
Yeah, and like, when we do the Sleep Cycle, in hopes was to try and get our student athletes off their phones. They're not sitting there on social media, and you turn on Sleep Cycle and you put it down, and it was almost like a routine of, cool, I'm done for the day. This is now like moving on to my next thing. Right?
I like that.
As opposed to letting them like kind of play around on social media or whatever they were going to do, and just accidentally chip away at staying up late. Trying to give them a routine that says, and now it's sleep time. I put my phone down and I intentionally try to go to bed.
No, that's good. Okay, so who do you think is currently doing a good job implementing technology and training, right? Whether it be a person, university, organization?
I think there's so many people. I think almost anything that comes out of the Louisville staff, I've always been really impressed with. I think they do a good job.
Okay.
I think with the GPS stuff, Tom Milroy at Texas A&M does a heck of a job. He and I talk shop quite a bit about it. I think, from a different sort of side of the spectrum of a budget, and I certainly can't speak to Louisville and Texas A&M's budget, but I would venture to guess it's greater than University of Portland's. I think Griffin and Ross and Richie are doing a heck of a job.
Yeah.
Doing some monitoring on a variety of teams.
Okay.
On a limited budget.
Yeah.
I know that volleyball was using the VERT system to try and track vertical jump from a training load that way, and create some threshold numbers, and then implementing RPE and implementing wellness. I know they use the Polar team system. So from pretty limited staff and a limited budget, I think those guys are doing a bang up job.
Yeah.
From the private sector, I think Joel Jameson's done an incredible job of bringing awareness to sleep and recovery and kind of HRV to the masses.
Yeah.
Right? Like, how many people talk about his work for conditioning and heart rate based training, and his work on HRV, and he puts a lot of really good stuff out there, I think.
Oh gosh, yeah. Agreed. Yeah. Okay.
From a nutrition side, David Goldman.
Okay. I'll have to look into him. He's the only name that I haven't necessarily heard, so that's good for me because I always love learning something. You know what I mean?
Oh man, that guy's crazy smart.
Okay.
When it comes to nutrition.
Awesome. Okay. So what should strength coaches learn in order to not get left behind in this kind of age of technological advancements?
I think if you have a really good understanding of energy system developments and the bioenergetics, and understanding the demands of the sports that you're working with, then you'll be able to sort of keep up with the technology, because the technology, in my opinion, is kind of like a skill, right? So if let's say I haven't worked with GPS, but because I have a really good understanding of energy systems and the demands of the sport, then it's almost like it's just a new skill that I need to learn for my job, because I understand the questions and I understand the loads and I understand what it all means.
Yeah.
But I think it's also looking to the people who have these big budgets, who actually have the ability to have something like Catapult, or have something like some of the Polar systems. And those companies, Catapult and Polar, like, they do put out quite a bit of like the research and the white papers. Omega Wave puts out a lot of good information, following the individuals and the coaches who are using that stuff.
Yeah.
I think it's a good way to figure out like what's coming up, how are they using it, and is that a person for my team and for the department that I'm in that I can use as a resource to help me along my path, right? I don't think that there's one piece of technology or one system that's going to take over, because there's such a variety of way of doing things.
Oh, there's so many ways.
Yeah, like who's in your network and who's doing what.
Yeah.
And how does that fit in?
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay. So kind of moving forward a little bit into more some personal questions, right? So what are some resources that have had a big impact on you?
I would probably say, as a person, Brad Scott, who's now at the Atlanta Braves, has had a huge impact on me personally and as a coach.
Yeah.
From like a book standpoint, I would say Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss is about negotiation. And we talked about like how to get compliance on student athletes and on coaches. I think there's a lot of good nuggets out of that book of how to communicate with somebody else to get them to think that your idea is a good idea.
I like that.
Yeah, and Joel Jamison's work has had a huge impact on how I look at conditioning. I remember when I first read the Ultimate MMA Conditioning book, like, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, and I've probably read it, 7 times.
Yeah.
That when I first read it, it sort of flipped my world upside down of how I saw our field and how I saw looking at training.
Agreed. And I feel like that's everybody's response when they read that book, because that thing was crazy good, Yeah,
crazy good, and like an easy read and not super long.
Yeah.
But it makes you think, and you can reread it several times, and depending on your clientele or depending on your sport, you're able to take more pieces from it.
Yeah.
I think he did a really good job. It's actually sitting right next to me.
Look at that. A little plug. I love it. Okay. So moving into this last segment, right, it's just a little bit of rapid fire questions. So the first one being, what are some quotes, if you have any, that you live by?
Don't be a fuck.
Heard that one before from you.
Yeah. Can't means won't try.
Yeah.
And if you can't carry it, you can't have it.
Yeah, there it is. Okay. What is the best advice you've ever been given?
Buy a book with every paycheck.
I like that. Okay. What is one of your biggest struggles that you've had to overcome?
Telling my family I was gay.
Okay. What is the worst advice you've ever been given?
education, your first job will pay for it. Basically, you don't need to invest in your education. Somebody else will do it is by far the worst advice.
Yeah, I like that. Okay. And last question here. What are some projects that you're currently working on, and how can people kind of reach out to you and follow your journey?
Yeah, well, certainly Blue Chip is, working on just finding like-minded people in the club and collegiate environment that we can partner with to bring applied sports science.
Yeah.
Kind of on the back end of that, we're looking to build out a more robust sports nutrition aspect.
Yeah.
To also bring that to the table.
Yeah.
And then, our website is bluechipperformance.com, and on all the social medias, it's Blue Chip Performance.
Fantastic. Well, Kat, thank you so much for your time. This has been huge for me. I'm sure a lot of listeners are going to be getting a lot out of this. So thanks again for your time, and I really look forward to connecting again soon in the future.
Juan, this was awesome. Thank you for your time. Thanks for the invitation.